Ancient texts were not written to entertain, they were written to preserve survival knowledge, among instructions on farming, warfare, law, and worship. There exists a darker category of information, warnings, not metaphors, not moral lessons, but explicit instructions about what must never be approached, named, awakened, or studied, across civilizations that never contacted each other. Forbidden creatures appear again and again. These beings were not hunted, worshipped, or challenged. They were avoided. The language used to describe them is different from typical monsters. They are not framed as enemies to be defeated, but as catastrophes waiting to happen. In Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets, there are references to beings described as those not meant for the upper world. These entities were said to exist beneath the foundations of the earth, sealed away after a primordial age. The texts do not describe their appearance in detail. Instead, they focus on instructions: never dig too deep, never open sealed chambers, never call their names during rituals. Priests were instructed to erase certain symbols after writing them, believing the symbols themselves could attract attention. This suggests a belief that these beings could perceive human activity from afar. In ancient Hebrew texts outside the canonical Bible, particularly in apocryphal writings, there are references to creatures that existed before humanity's final form. These beings are described as incomplete or corrupted, remnants of earlier creations that were sealed away. The texts explicitly state that humanity was forbidden from interacting with them, not because they were evil in a moral sense, but because contact would destabilize reality itself. The language implies these creatures were incompatible with the world humans inhabit. In ancient Egyptian records, certain regions of the desert were marked not as dangerous, but as forbidden. These locations were associated with beings referred to as the Silent Ones, entities that moved without sound and left no tracks. Expeditions were ordered to avoid these regions entirely. When travelers disappeared, it was not blamed on bandits or animals, but on violations of ancient boundaries. Temples contained inscriptions warning priests never to perform summoning rituals near these zones. The implication was clear: these creatures did not belong to the realm of the living, but could cross into it under specific conditions. In ancient India, Vedic texts describe beings known as Rakshasas not simply as demons, but as entities that thrived on disruption of cosmic order. Certain Rakshasas were considered untouchable even by gods, sealed away rather than destroyed. Texts warned that knowledge of their true forms was restricted to specific lineages, and even then, only partially revealed. The danger was not physical attack, but contamination. Exposure to these beings was believed to alter the mind, leading to madness, obsession, and eventual death. In Chinese historical records, particularly in Taoist texts, there are references to things that walk between breaths. These entities were said to exist in moments rather than spaces, appearing only during specific astronomical alignments. Entire rituals were designed not to summon them, but to ensure they remained unaware of human presence. Scholars were warned that excessive study of these beings could invite attention. The texts emphasize avoidance, silence, and ignorance as protective measures. Knowledge itself was treated as a risk factor. Indigenous American traditions also contain warnings about forbidden beings. Among several tribes, there are stories of creatures that were once human but transformed through violation of sacred laws. These beings were not killed because doing so was believed to spread their influence. Instead, they were isolated, sealed away in remote regions, or bound by rituals. Elders instructed younger generations never to speak of them openly. The belief was that attention fed them. What unites these accounts is a consistent theme: these creatures were not meant to be part of the human world. They are described as leftovers, mistakes, or consequences of earlier cosmic events, and like typical monsters, they do not seek conflict. Their mere presence is enough to cause disaster. Crops fail, animals flee, people become old without visible cause. Ancient texts often associate these beings with environmental collapse rather than violence. Floods, plagues, and earthquakes are sometimes attributed to breaches involving forbidden creatures. This suggests that ancient people viewed them not as predators, but as destabilizing forces. Another recurring element is sealing. Many texts describe efforts to imprison or isolate these beings rather than destroy them. Caves were sealed. Gates were buried. Entire cities were abandoned. The implication is that these creatures could not be killed using available means. Destruction was considered impossible or too dangerous. Containment was the only option. In some cases, rituals were performed periodically to ensure seals remained intact. Failure to maintain these rituals was believed to result in catastrophic consequences. The fear surrounding these beings was not emotional panic, but procedural caution. This suggests institutionalized knowledge rather than folklore. The language used is administrative, legal, and ritualistic. Instructions are precise. Consequences are clearly outlined. This is not storytelling. It is documentation. Modern interpretations often dismiss these texts as symbolic or allegorical. However, symbolism does not explain the consistency across cultures or the specificity of instructions, nor does it explain why knowledge itself was restricted. If these beings were purely imaginary, there would be no need to limit awareness. Ancient societies openly discussed gods, monsters, and spirits. Only these entities were treated differently. Silence was enforced. Names were erased. Accords were fragmented intentionally. This suggests that ancient people believed something real was at stake. Whether these creatures were misunderstood natural phenomena, psychological constructs, or something else entirely remains unknown. What matters is how seriously they were treated. Entire belief systems were structured around avoiding them. Entire regions were left unexplored. Certain technologies and practices were abandoned due to perceived risk. This level of caution implies repeated negative outcomes in the past. Something happened that convinced civilizations the risk was not theoretical. Today, many of these forbidden locations remain unexplored or avoided. Some are restricted for political reasons. Others are simply inaccessible. Modern humans assume this is coincidence. Ancient texts suggest otherwise. They believed some doors were never meant to be opened. Some knowledge was not power, but danger. And some creatures were not meant to be remembered. The fact that these warnings survived at all suggests that ancient people believed future generations might forget, and forgetting, they feared, would lead to repetition, whatever these forbidden creatures truly were. Ancient humanity made one thing clear. They were not myths to be enjoyed. They were mistakes that were buried, and they were buried for a reason.